Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Welcome to another monthly reading wrap up. These are my very favorite videos to watch on YouTube and some of my favorite videos to film as well. So I am excited to talk about the books that I read last month. If you've been here, you already know the drill, but if you're new, I'm basically going to give a brief spoiler-free synopsis of each book that I read in August. Then I'll go into my general thoughts and opinions, and I'll tell you if I would recommend the book or not, and then give my star rating for each book as well. August was a really interesting reading month because I read 13 books total, which is a new record for me for books read in a month. I think not only for this year, but for last year as well. I'm pretty sure 12 was my record last year. Usually I read an average of like 6 to 10 books, so 13 is really good for me. I was just in such a reading mood. I read a lot of books that have been on my TBR for a long time, a lot of popular books that I've been wanting to read forever. Unfortunately though, a lot of the books that I read in August, I was either not a big fan of or I just felt kind of neutral towards. There were a couple books I did really like and would definitely recommend to you guys, but there weren't really any new standout favorites that I'm now obsessed with. But that's just kind of the way it goes sometimes as a reader. We have a lot of books to talk about today, so let's just get right into it. The first book that I read in August, it feels like I read this a lifetime ago because I actually started it in mid-July, put it down for a couple weeks, and then picked it back up in early August, and it was the very first book in the month that I finished, and that is 6 Summers to Fall by C.W. Farnsworth. I literally saw one TikTok about this book and it was enough to convince me to pick it up and read it because the girl was like, this book is childhood friends to strangers to lovers. The male love interest is in the NHL, so it's a hockey romance, and it takes place by the water at this really summery setting, and it's on Kindle Unlimited. So I was like, sign me up. That sounds like my ideal kind of book. And basically in this book we follow a young woman named Harper. She is driving to go to her sister's wedding, and on the way there she makes a pit stop at her family's old lake house that they still own, but they haven't been to the house in a while because of some things that happened in the family. And when she's there, she ends up running into her old friend Drew, and it's kind of apparent that there's feelings between them, but we're not really sure like what is going on. His family also had a neighboring house at the same lake, and she ends up asking him to be her date to her sister's wedding. And we follow them over the course of this week leading up to the wedding, where the bridal party is doing all these kind of activities together by the water. It is dual POV, so we do alternate chapters from Harper and Drew's perspective, and unfortunately this one was a miss for me. I ended up giving it 2 stars. I quickly learned while I was reading this that the title is extremely misleading. I feel like the title makes you think that you're gonna get all these glimpses of the past over these 6 summers and watching this couple fall in love, and we don't get any glimpses of the past at all. We're basically seeing them meet again at this lakeside town for the first time in years, and we're just made to believe that they have all these feelings for one another and that they're rekindling their connection and building something that they used to have over the course of this week without seeing them fall in love over the course of these 6 summers. So in that way it kind of felt like their relationship moved too fast because we don't see the progression. We just see them over the course of this week. It didn't feel like it had a whole lot of depth to me. Also, the spice in this book was kind of strange to me. I literally went to double check to see if C.W. Farnsworth was a man or woman. It just felt like it was kind of written for the male gaze. Also, this book kind of threw me off because we see them over the course of this week leading up to the wedding day, and I thought it was going to end there, but the wedding comes and goes and there's still like 40% left in the book. So the last part of the book changes location and you see the couple in like different environments and see their relationship in a different way, and I actually liked that part of the book more because we got to kind of see Drew playing hockey and them interacting at a hockey game, and I liked that location and setting and their relationship way more at the end of the book than I did seeing them at this wedding location. The book definitely had a shift and it kind of felt like 2 different books to me that didn't really mesh that well into one story. So it was a little bit messy in that way. It definitely wasn't terrible. Like, I liked some parts of it. I just feel like it was lacking in depth a little bit and the title was very misleading. I read 2 Leanne Moriarty books in August, the first one being Apples Never Fall. This book follows the Delaney family. We have the husband and wife who are an older married couple, Joy and Stan, and then they have 4 grown adult children, and we get past and present timelines. In the past, we kind of learn about the family dynamic, and the past timeline is really centered around this one event that happened where this young woman comes and knocks on Joy and Stan's door, and she's bleeding, she's in bad shape, she claims that her boyfriend abused her, and so Stan and Joy end up taking her in and helping her get back on her feet until she's good to go. And then then in the present timeline, we learn that Joy, the wife and mother of the Delaney family, has gone missing. So the two timelines are kind of converging, and it's like, did this woman who randomly came and stayed with Joy and Stan have something to do with her disappearance? And the children are kind of taking different sides. And I really enjoyed this book. It was one of my favorites that I read in August. I gave this book 4.25 stars. I loved following the characters in this book. It was written in a really cool way because you get to see all of the characters' perspectives, and then you also get chapters from people interacting with them. So you kind of get to see each character from other people's point of view on the outside, just people they interact with throughout their day-to-day life, but it's all relevant to the story and helps drive the plot along. And I thought it was really well done. I became so invested in the story. I did not guess what happened. I had all these theories and predictions for what happened to Joy, and none of them ended up being right. This book ended in my very favorite kind of way because every single detail, every single thing that was thrown at us ended up being relevant to the plot. Everything tied up in a nice little bow at the end. Everything just came together perfectly, and I absolutely loved the ending. My only issue with this book is I do feel like it was a little bit too long and it dragged in some parts. Other than that, I did really enjoy my time with this one, and I would highly recommend it. The next Liane Moriarty book I read is The Husband's Secret, and in this book we're following 3 different women's perspectives. The first woman we follow is named Cecilia, and her husband is away on a business trip, and one day she goes into the attic trying to find something, and she comes across this letter, and on the outside of the envelope in her husband's handwriting it says, "For my wife, only open this in the event of my death." So she's like, what the heck? And she ends up calling her husband later, and she's like, hey, I found this letter in the attic. What is this? And he's like, oh no, please don't open it. I'm embarrassed. I wrote that in like a desperate time. Please don't open it. Please don't read it. And you soon find that the contents in the letter affect all 3 of the women that we're following in this book. You learn how all 3 of their storylines come together and how the 3 women affect one another, and it was so very interesting to read about. I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars though, because I felt the story was really well crafted and very well written. The reveal in it did really surprise me, and I was not expecting it at all, but I just never really connected to the characters. I never really got sucked into the story. I always felt like I was kind of watching it from the outside instead of being immersed in the story, as I felt with Liane Moriarty's other books that I've read. So I did really enjoy this one, but I just couldn't really like connect to it on a personal level. The next book I read is another thriller. I was on quite a thriller kick in August, and I read The Golden Couple by Sarah Pekkanen and Greer Hendricks. I read The Wife Between Us by them when I was first getting back into reading, and I felt kind of in the middle about that one, but since I did read it when I first was getting back into reading, I've always wanted to try something else by them, and this is, I think, one of their more recent releases. I believe it came out last year, and I heard pretty good things about it. I don't think anyone was like raving about this book, but I didn't hear any bad reviews for it. And basically this book follows a married couple who go see this therapist to try and solve the problems in their marriage that they're dealing with, and this therapist actually lost her license, but she still kind of sees clients under the table, and she has very unorthodox ways of working with her clients and trying to help fix their problems. And I ended up giving this book 3 stars. I thought it was extremely entertaining. I was engaged the entire time. It was very well paced. There was not a single chapter where I was bored. I felt like every single chapter gave new information that was relevant to the story, and I was really sucked in. However, the ending, it did surprise me, and it wasn't what I was expecting, but while it was happening I was just kind of like, huh, okay. It didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. The more I stop and look back on the ending of this book and think about little things that happened, I feel like there's a lot of plot holes, because I'm starting to remember like, wait, what happened to this person? How did that happen? What happened with this? And I feel like we didn't get a lot of closure and answers to things that were brought up. So I enjoyed my time throughout it, but the ending was just like a little bit messy for me. I have another thriller to talk about next, which is Her Every Fear by Peter Swanson. Peter Swanson is an interesting author for me because he's written 2 of my very favorite thrillers of all time that I gave 5 stars to, but I've also given 2 stars to some of his books, and then some I've given like 3.5 stars and just felt kind of in the middle about. So I never really know how I'm gonna feel when I go into one of his books. This book follows a young British woman named Kate and her cousin Corbin, who is American and lives in Boston, and Corbin ends up getting a job offer in London, and he proposes that he and Kate do an apartment switch so Kate can live in his apartment in Boston Boston and take classes in the US, and then Corbin can live in her flat in London. So they end up going through with the switch, but as soon as Kate gets to Boston, she finds out that there has been a murder in Corbin's apartment complex. And the more details she starts to learn about the case and the more people she talks to, she realizes that her cousin Corbin might have some involvement in this murder. I ended up giving this book 3 stars. It took me a little bit to get into. I wasn't hooked right away, but I was interested to know more. And then I would say from like the 30 to the 70% mark, I was hooked. I loved that middle part of the story. It was dark and it was creepy and it was eerie. It was reminding me so much of The Kind Worth Killing, which is my favorite book by Peter Swanson, and I was just eating it up and loving it. But then I felt like the ending fell super flat and the story didn't really give me anything more, so it was a little bit disappointing. I don't know if I would recommend this one. Like, it was fine, it was okay, but I definitely think there are better thrillers by Peter Swanson. The next book that I read is Flock by Kate Stewart. This is the first book in the Ravenhood trilogy, and I have been so intrigued to pick up this book for the longest time because the way people describe it, it sounds so ominous, so mysterious. People say that you should go into it pretty much blindly and you're not going to know what's happening for the majority of the book until the end, but you're not supposed to. And people were pretty right about that. I would say you should not know a lot going in. Basically, all I think you need to know is that our main female character is a young woman named Cecilia. Her father is a very wealthy man who runs this like manufacturing plant, and she has like no relationship with him at all, but she wants her inheritance from him, and in order to get her inheritance, she has to work for him in his manufacturing plant for like a year. And when she gets there, she ends up meeting these guys, this group of guys, and she notices they all have the same raven tattoo. And so she keeps asking them, what does the tattoo mean? What is your group about? Like, what are you guys up to? What's going on here? And they just kind of give her half answers. They're like, you don't need to know. And I'm gonna leave it at that. I think that is all you should know going in. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. I did really enjoy it. I really enjoyed Kate Stewart's writing. People were very right to say that you're not going to know what's happening until the end, and I thought I was going to be disappointed by the ending, but my jaw was like actually on the floor when I got to the ending, and I immediately went into book 2, which I'm in the middle of right now, so you won't hear my thoughts on that until my September wrap up. But I was very surprised to learn what was going to happen. I thought the ending would disappoint me with the way people talk about this book, but I really wasn't disappointed. I had all these theories. I was like, I think they're doing this, this is going to happen, and none of them were correct. Basically, the one thing in this book is it has a certain trope in here that's just not my cup of tea. It's just completely personal preference. That was my only hesitation with rating this book any higher. I just couldn't really get into that part of the story, but other than that, I really did enjoy the plot line, and I'm excited to see where the rest of this trilogy ends up going. Finally have a physical book to hold and show you guys. The next book I read is Ali Hazelwood's new book, Love Theoretically. This book follows a theoretical physicist named Elsie. She is an adjunct professor and she doesn't make a lot of money doing that, so to supplement her income, she works as a fake girlfriend, but she is trying to interview for a tenured professor position so that she can quit doing that, make more money, have a more stable income and job. And one of the guys that is interviewing her for this professor position is actually the brother of one of her clients that she fake dates, and his name is Jack. And when she fake dates these people, she kind of has to give a fake backstory about herself. So this Jack guy knows her as his brother's girlfriend and not as this theoretical physicist. So he sees her as a liar and he's like, what is going on here? Jack is an experimental physicist, so they kind of have like a rivalry going on in the science community, and we follow their relationship from there. I did enjoy this book. However, I think it is probably my least favorite Ali Hazelwood book so far. I ended up giving it 4 stars, but I do think I kind of have an unpopular opinion when it comes to Ali Hazelwood's books because I preferred Love on the Brain. I loved that book. I gave it 5 stars. It was one of my favorites that I read last year, but from what I've heard, that seems to be most people's least favorite, and this book seems to be most people's favorite. And I can see why people like this book so much, but I personally just never really connected to Elsie or Jack, and I wasn't rooting for them as a couple that hard. Not that I didn't like them, but I don't know, I just didn't get that invested in the relationship. I thought this book was so well written though. It was really smart. There were so many witty jokes in here that I laughed out loud at. One thing I usually love in her romance books is the pacing of it. I think she paces them out so well. And in this one, I don't know, I kind of just wanted to see more of a build-up, and it felt like it was very science heavy and more focused on the characters individually, which is fine, but just personally I wanted to see more of them interacting together and their relationship building up. And I just feel like her first two books did that a little better, to where I got more invested in the characters and their story. And this just so far is my least favorite, but in saying it's my least favorite, I still gave it 4 stars, so it's a great least favorite. The next few books I'm going to talk about I actually filmed for a reading vlog where I did a realistic reading week in my life, so if you want any more in-depth thoughts on these next few books, definitely check out that video. The first book I read for that video is The Summer of Broken Rules by K.L. Walther. This one follows a young woman named Meredith, and she goes to Martha's Vineyard every summer with her family, but this summer is going to be different because it's the first summer that they're going without her older sister, because her older sister just passed away. So this book does deal with grief. They're going for Meredith's cousin's wedding, and when they get there, there is this big family-wide game of assassin that they play all on the property, and Meredith also strikes up a romance with one of the groomsmen. I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars. I thought the summer vibes of this book were great. I would definitely recommend this for summer. The atmosphere was amazing. The setting was amazing. That was definitely my favorite part of the book. It could be a little juvenile at times, like the game of assassin was fun, but I don't know, some of the things the characters said and did, I was like, this is definitely a YA novel, but that's fine. I'm not the target audience. It was still cute. Our main girl Meredith did get on my nerves at some times, but overall I generally liked her. I thought this book talked about grief really well. I thought it was a good balance of having emotional depth, but this book didn't feel really heavy. It still felt like a fun, uplifting, happy story. I think my biggest thing with this book was the romance. It was insta-lovey, which didn't really bother me because this book takes place over the course of this one wedding week. So there's not that much time for Meredith and the love interest to get to know each other and for feelings to develop. However, the love interest in this book, I felt like he was kind of related to Meredith by marriage because it's her cousin's husband's stepbrother. So not blood related at all, but I was like, are they still not considered cousins-in-law? That was just my own personal thoughts on that because I went through Goodreads and I couldn't find a single review where someone else had mentioned that. So maybe that's just my own thinking and reading too much into it, but overall it was enjoyable. It was a very easy and quick read and great summer vibes. Then I read Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. This book is actually on Kindle Unlimited now, which is crazy to me because this was like an OG book talk book that was super popular, super beloved, and the movie just came out. I feel like I'm one of the last people to read this book, so I was really excited to pick it up. This book is a romance between the son of the President of the United States and the Prince of England. Basically, something happens where they are portrayed in the media as enemies. So for the sake of good press and international relations and Alex's mom up for re-election and wanting to put a good image out there, they schedule these meetups between Prince Henry and Alex to make it look like they actually are friends, and in the process a real friendship develops and then a romance from there. And I ended up giving this book 4 stars. The first half was super hard for me to get into and I wasn't loving it. It is very politics heavy, and it's more politics heavy than I thought it was going to be, so I wasn't expecting that. It felt like it was mostly just a story about Alex and the White House and helping his mom with her re-election campaign. I also was surprised that we only get Alex's perspective in here. I was really hoping for it to be dual POV and alternating every other chapter from Henry and Alex's perspective. I would have loved to see more of Henry's side of the story and see his life in London. I thought that would have been a really cool setting to change things up. I also feel like the romance for the first half definitely was more of a subplot, so I just wanted more of that in the story. But the second half definitely turned it around for me. I thought it was super cute. It made me understand why this book is so beloved, and it just felt like a very fairy tale kind of romance. I also watched the movie and thought it was so good. It was an amazing adaptation. The next book I read is The Bodyguard by Catherine Center. This is another super popular, widely beloved book that I feel like I'm one of the last people to finally read. So we follow Hannah. She is a bodyguard who works for a protection agency based out of Texas, and she gets assigned to the case of this movie star named Jack Stapleton. He's coming home to take care of his mother who is sick, and he needs a bodyguard because he has this like stalker situation, but he doesn't want to worry his family. He doesn't want to upset his mother while she's sick and trying to heal, and so he doesn't want her to know about the stalker situation and that he even needs a bodyguard. So to cover for that, Hannah ends up pretending to be Jack's girlfriend, and it becomes a fake dating trope. And I gave this one 3 stars. I really don't have a lot to say about it because I don't think it was bad at all. I just personally didn't love it. I just couldn't really get into it or connect with it. I loved the premise of it, but the execution just kind of bored me a bit. I don't really know what it is about it that I couldn't get into. I can't put my finger on it, but just something about it, I just couldn't really get into the story. It didn't feel super romance heavy. It was like funny, and I definitely felt the comedy bits of it, but it wasn't the most romantic of stories. It was perfectly fine, and I didn't dislike it, but I just didn't love it. I also started The Push by Ashley Aldrain and that same reading vlog, but I had only read to page 16 when the vlog ended. This is basically a thriller about motherhood. We follow a woman named Blythe, and she has a child that she just doesn't connect with. She doesn't feel that motherly bond that she thinks that she's supposed to have with her baby, and she's like, is there something wrong with me? Is there something wrong with the baby? Because when she has a second child, she does really bond and connect with that one, and some crazy weird things go down with the first child. And I think that's really all you should know going into it, because that's all I knew going into it, and I really enjoyed my time. I gave this book 4.25 stars. This was probably my favorite book of the month, tied with Apples Never Fall. I might like this one a little bit better. I really enjoyed this one. I thought it was so gripping, so fast-paced. Every chapter is literally like a page. So if you're in a reading slump, I highly recommend this book because it was impossible to put down. I would read one chapter and I would be like, okay, one more. And it was so easy to fly through since each chapter is literally a page. For a good part of the story, I thought I knew where it was going, and I was like, okay, it's so obvious that this is what it is. And then it ended up not being at all what I thought it was. I feel like Ashley Aldrain did that on purpose. She tries to kind of throw you off and make you think one thing, but I thought the ending was so good. Literally the only reason I didn't read this book in one sitting is because I just had to put it down because it was making me so sad. I kind of feel like if Taylor Jenkins Reid wrote a thriller, it would be something like this. That's kind of what the writing reminded me of. I was gripped, I was sucked in. I think this is a really great thriller. Lots of trigger warnings, so definitely check them if you're interested in picking this one up, but I would highly recommend it. The next book that I finally finished is Survive the Night by Riley Sager. I started this book last November, and it took me forever to read it, not because it was bad, even though I didn't really like it, but it's one that I've been reading with my husband. We'll like read it aloud before bed, but we were reading it literally at a snail's pace. We would read maybe like a couple chapters a month, so it was very slow going, and that's why it took me so long to get through. This book takes place in the 90s. We're following a college student named Charlie. Her best friend was just murdered by this serial killer that's on her college campus, so she is trying to get away, so she ends up getting a ride to head back home with this guy from the college ride board, and we're following her over the course of this one night while she's in the car with this guy, and things start happening in the car that make her question if this guy could be the serial killer. And my husband and I both agreed that we would give this book 2 stars. I thought it was going to be way more intense and way more high stakes than it was. I thought I was going to be on the edge of my seat because it's going to take place over this one night and she's in the car with this guy. It's just going to be so intense. And to me, it really dragged. I feel like there's only so much that can happen with 2 people in a car. It would literally describe Charlie like holding the seatbelt and looking out the window for like 10 pages. And it just felt very slow going to me. This is also one of those books where there's not a whole lot of characters to begin with, so it can kind of only end in like one of a few ways, and so we definitely predicted the ending in this one. The thing that bothered me the most with this book is our main character is extremely unreliable. She has this thing where she dissociates and she calls it a movie in her mind. So there would be entire scenes where afterwards she would be like, but wait, was that a movie in my mind? And then it became the whole thing where like, okay, well, is this really happening or is it another movie in her mind? And the movies in her mind just got to be too much. It wasn't even like, oh my gosh, what's real, what's not. It just got to the point of being annoying to us. I did really like that this book was written kind of like a classic slasher film. and the writing was good, but it was just kind of too slow moving for me and just a really frustrating main character and just kind of a predictable ending. But I did really like that it read like a classic scary movie. And finally, the last book that I read in August is None of This Is Serious by Catherine Prasifka. And the story with this book is I actually first heard about this book last year from Jack Edwards. I think the author actually sent Jack a copy of her book, and the way she described it, it just sounded right up my alley. She's an Irish author. The book is about a young woman finding herself, exploring her relationships in Ireland, and it felt like a very character-driven book. And then Jack Edwards ended up giving it 2 stars, I think, and he put it in his like worst books that he read last year video. So I was like, I don't know, but I decided to pick it up because I found out that Catherine Prasifka is actually Sally Rooney's sister-in-law, which is super cool. I am a huge Sally Rooney fan, a huge fan of books that take place in Ireland, so I wanted to give it a try. This book doesn't really have much of a plot or storyline. We're really just following a young woman in Ireland named Sophie, and she's in her early 20s. We're following her as she navigates her friendships and romantic relationships and things that young people are dealing with, like school, finding a job, dealing with their self-image. And a big part of this novel is social media and the internet and how that affects our relationships and just everything in our lives. And I ended up giving this one 2.5 stars. I can't even really put my finger on how exactly I feel about this book. I think that if this was a short story, I would have really enjoyed it more because I liked the message and what it was trying to portray with our social media use and how that affects our communication and things like that. I didn't exactly have the most enjoyable time reading this. Our main character was kind of whiny, and I feel like she was trying to be more relatable than she really was. I almost felt like this book was trying too hard to be like an Otessa Moshfegh, Sally Rooney book, and it missed the mark a little bit for me. I can't really put my finger on exactly what I did or didn't like about it, and I think that's where my rating comes from. I just feel kind of indifferent about it. And those are the 13 books that I read in the month of August. Let me know what you guys read in August, what you loved, what you didn't love, if you read any of the same books as me and what you thought about them. If you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up. If you're not already subscribed, hit the red button down below to stick around. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you so soon in my next video. Bye guys.